Today, it's finally time to talk about this big, beautiful angel, the Speaker of God. But we're not just going to break down what we know about her from Hazbin Hotel itself. Instead, we're also going to try and get to what I believe was the original version of this character from back when Hazbin Hotel was just a series of comic strips within the bigger world of Zoophobia. This is the character Adina, who I think, despite the color differences, a lot of you probably see a lot of similarities with the Speaker of God. And her role in the original Zoophobia story that the Hazbin Hotel characters appeared in is very similar. But we're also going to get into the real-life inspirations for this character, as the idea of a speaker to God exists in the esoteric tradition in religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Gnosticism. This isn't going to be just a Hazbin Hotel character breakdown thus, but a look at the potential themes the series will cover as a whole, as I think the Speaker of God isn't as innocent as she looks and may even be some level of what we'd call evil. So let's break it all down. Now, real quick, what or who is the Speaker to God? The show introduced this figure very suddenly in episode 2 of season 2, after most of the audience had been led to believe that Sarah was the highest power in heaven. This makes sense, as Sarah is short for Seraphim, the full title used for her in the episode when Sarah is being addressed formally. And Seraphim are generally regarded as the highest ranking angels in different hierarchies found in Judaism and Christianity. But in this episode, we learn that while Sarah is in charge of heaven and is even meant to make decisions leading heaven on her own, she is technically outranked by this Speaker of God here. The Speaker of God appeared in this episode, of course, during the trial of Serpentius, where most of the angels were feeling aggressive towards Serpentius because of the mystery that his presence adds to heaven, as well as all of the guilt they feel over having other humans permanently slain by the annual exterminations. With Serpentius in heaven, they now realize that they shouldn't have exterminated anyone in hell, as there was always the chance they could be redeemed and join their loved ones in heaven. But it's the Speaker of God who has to come down and calm everyone by framing the redemption of Penchus as good news. This introduction came in the heavenly courtroom, which Lute reveals to be the room of the Speaker. The Speaker seems like all the other angelic beings in that they can leave this room and go to other places as we see, but this room appears to be specifically where more important open business for heaven is conducted so that she can intervene. The thing about the Speaker is she only seems to intervene when she thinks it's absolutely necessary. In the room of the Speaker, Lute indicates that it's more so for everyone to have their voice heard by her, not suppressed, making it more of a room where everyone is allowed to have their concerns heard. But why is the Speaker so detached? And even more weird, why does she seem about as clueless as everyone else when it comes to Serpentius? Sure, she accepts him more warmly the way Emily does, but she acts confused about him and seems to need Penchus to really confirm that his entry into heaven was legitimate. Now, despite the character only appearing now in episode 2 of the second season, it turns out this character was already mentioned in the official Hazbin Hotel season 1 promotion materials. In particular, the Speaker of God was mentioned, although not pictured, in the Hazbin Hotel playbill that people ordered as part of an early access program for season 1, which they were supposed to receive in the mail. While we did get early access to the season for those who purchased it, as well as some other items, the playbill is notoriously famous for having some strange issue getting in the mail, with virtually no one, or possibly no one at all, actually getting this until after season 1 had aired, and the show had gone into hiatus. I heard Sarcastic Chorus say the other day that he never actually received this ever, and I eventually received a crumpled up version of it in the mail, but because it was so late, there wasn't a lot of content covering the secrets inside of it, including the mention of the Speaker of God. The playbill is meant to feel like a theater playbill, which mostly focuses on the basic information about the story of the play and its characters, as well as information about the cast itself. It's in Sarah's character description where we learn that Sarah isn't actually the top power in heaven, but that she actually answers to the figure known as the Speaker of God. For those who did know about this character from the playbill, the introduction of the Speaker of God felt a bit less random, and more like something foreshadowed the way Vivziepop tends to like with the meta-connections of the universe. But that really just strengthens the question of why the Speaker of God didn't bother popping up in season 1, and now why they would seemingly let the annual exterminations happen when even Sarah herself felt so riddled with doubt about whether or not it was the right choice. Well, the Speaker of God claims, at least by title, to speak for God, but that doesn't mean that God has much to say. Previously, the only quotes from God that we see came from Hell of a Boss, on the background of a motivational poster in heaven where God apparently says to drop your friends who don't get you anywhere. But I'm not sure this moment was meant to be taken very seriously. Here with the Speaker of God, what we have is someone who claims to hear what God is saying and to give that information to everyone else when required. But obviously, there is going to be more to that story than what's implied by the name. Thus far, the Speaker of God has allowed Sarah to run heaven, but the idea is that everyone there is meant to feel like they have a stake in what is happening, such as they have the right to speak their voice in the room of the Speaker to God, as Lute explained. It gives the impression that the Speaker of God is acting on the idea that everyone is supposed to guide themselves, and that God's duty, as well as hers, is to be somewhat detached. This would explain why God doesn't seem to have any direct control over the world of heaven, hell, or earth. When it comes to the Speaker, it makes sense to have at least one figure who can interpret what you think, so that you can still affect the flow of things. But in much of spirituality, there is the important idea that God does not directly affect the free will of humans, or even higher beings like angels. Instead, what God does is manipulate events on a more subtle level, and then let people make the choices based on what is in front of them. This is why there is often the narrative of life being a test that God constructs for us, one where he already knows what we will fail at, but also what will make us rise. This makes sense with Hazbin Hotel, as later in the episode, Sarah pretty directly asks the Speaker of God the questions we are all thinking, basically asking the Speaker why God and she herself would allow all of these events to happen. It's in this musical sequence where the Speaker of God makes it clear that certain answers are only allowed to be found by the people asking the questions, which in this case is Sarah. Right now, Sarah is conflicted because she has blood on her hands from allowing these exterminations. She felt terrible about it at the start, and she feels even worse now, and she's realizing that God and the Speaker didn't stop her, even when she didn't want to do it. If she had known sinners could be redeemed, she wouldn't have called for the exterminations. However, it's important to remember that without the exterminations, we never would have had the first ever redemption to happen in the form of Serpentius. In theory, anyone could just redeem themselves by making up for the sins they committed on Earth, but with Serpentius, he very specifically died in his hellish form and then manifested again in heaven as a winner. This only worked, it seems, because he died, and he died in a way that everyone was certain he was gone for good, indicating that the beam Adam used has the same power as the angelic weapons, a power to smite. What this means is that without the annual exterminations due to hell having a bit of an uprising under Lilith, there would be no method for killing sinners even introduced to hell. There are probably tons of sinners in hell who have risked their lives for others, or who selflessly accepted pain in hell so that their loved ones could escape and not suffer, but they can't actually die without angelic weapons or smiting. And without that, you seemingly can't manifest again in heaven. So in the end, the only way this becomes logically possible is for a war between these two groups to break out in order for the death of sinners to be introduced to hell with angelic weapons. And this is why, whether it's with the Speaker of God or God himself, that this had to be allowed to happen. The Speaker of God puts it best herself when she sings that every transgression is meant to be a lesson. Here she is talking about Sarah being allowed to approve the extermination, but this is really the nature of the show and real-life spirituality as a whole. This means that Lucifer's fall was allowed to happen so that there could be some sort of lesson learned from it, a rise in one way or another that mirrors the fall and teaches everyone involved an important truth. But the big question this leaves is, what if the same is true for the Speaker of God? Right now, she presents herself as a warm, radiating light of positivity, but that seems like such an obvious setup for revealing something really twisted about her later on. But for proof of this, I think we need to look at the character of Adina, who I believe to be the original version of the Speaker of God back in Hazbin Hotel's early development. Now, for those of you who don't know, long before Hazbin Hotel was an Amazon series or even a pilot on YouTube, Hazbin Hotel itself was just one side story in a long-running comic started by VivziePop. The Hazbin Hotel characters were part of the ever-evolving and shifting cast that were meant to come in much later after other certain arcs had been completed in the comic, but VivziePop only ever finished one volume and was very far from ever actually introducing the characters in the official story. To be honest, this original Zoophobia comic wasn't even very much about demons and hell, but mostly supernatural creatures in general. But it was a really epic story, and there'll be links at the end of this video and down below to see my bigger breakdowns on its history. But the important thing to know is that the Hazbin Hotel characters still had the same basic story of being a bunch of demons who thought they were unfairly being persecuted by heaven. The backstories of a lot of our favorite characters were different, such as Charlie being a sinner instead of the Princess of Hell, and Angel actually dating Vaggie. But the important figure we're discussing today is the villain Adina. Adina, as you can see, is basically just a blue version of the Speaker of God, both being huge divine angels with flowy gowns. With the color scheme, a lot of us thought that Sarah herself was the new version of Adina for Hazbin Hotel's story. But with the introduction of the Speaker of God, we have a character who is much more similar in terms of personality and actual position in heaven, it seems. Adina, like the Speaker of God, tends to look rather composed, even in extreme situations where she probably shouldn't. In the few comic strips we have from this era, Adina is presented as the leader of a group of angel hunters who are trying to track down the Hazbin Hotel characters and drag them back to hell. And fun fact, you can see some of these demon hunters as background characters in Hazbin Hotel still. Despite this grim work, Adina maintains a smile in all of her comics, and is extra calm, treating her lackeys like their failings are just part of their learning. For instance, one angel hunter freezes when he already has Angel chained up and Vaggie is coming to rescue him. This is due to a beautiful memory he has of a moth as a child, and because of Vaggie's moth-like design, he can't bring himself to fight back against Vaggie either. After this, Adina comforts him, insisting that he won't make the same mistake again, all while maintaining her calm demeanor. But like the Speaker of God, Adina acts like all transgressions are ultimately necessary, and when explained to the wrong person, it comes off really cold and really dark. While this approach was comforting to one of her angel hunters who personally feels close to her, we see in another panel that Adina eventually captures Angel and starts torturing him. Using her angelic powers, she's able to make him re-experience moments on Earth, like when he and his brother died during one of their mafia jobs. At this point, Angel is begging for mercy, clearly being tortured, but Adina just maintains her smile and demeanor and insists that all sinners deserve to suffer. This is essentially the stance the Speaker would take with Sarah all these years, that if the sinners are in hell, that this is where they deserve to be, and if the winners are in heaven, that's where they deserve to be as well. Right now, the Speaker's innocent tone makes her feel comforting to the people who've known her long, particularly Sarah, but also even to Serpentius, who's just getting mercy from her. But how would it sound when she just smiles down at sinners and explains that they're supposed to be in hell, that they are not welcome in heaven the way Serpentius is because they have not been redeemed? The Speaker didn't feel it necessary to intervene with Charlie's own trial, begging for people to be given a chance, and if the Speaker had been pulled into this, I doubt she would have called for an end to the exterminations. And this is precisely why she stayed away from that conflict, I imagine, beyond it just not taking place in the room of the Speaker. With the similarities of Adina and the Speaker, I think it's obvious that there's something dark beneath her surface in one way or another, but for more evidence on that, we need to trace the real-life inspirations for the Speaker of God from the world religions, or the esoteric traditions that connect them. This is very important, as the idea of a certain divine figure being responsible for speaking for the one true God is a big part of ancient mythologies as well as Judaism, Christianity, and Gnosticism. Now in Judaism, they have the belief that worship is meant to be reserved for the one true God, but that doesn't mean they deny the existence of the gods of other religions. The Bible itself admits that the gods of other peoples, like the Canaanites, are real entities that do have an effect on the world, but that these angels are misleading the nations into thinking that they are the real gods. Thus, all of the different nations of the world were said to begin worshipping angels that were hiding the truth of a greater God above them. The problem is that humans cannot reach the one true God directly, and instead, these angels that we once called gods were seen as important intermediaries who were meant to act out God's will upon the earth. In Judaism, they were said to simply abandon their duties in order to use their powers to empower the wicked in the world. And for Judaism, their people are said to be no different, in that they also need an intermediary to talk with God or be led by him. In the Bible, this figure is set to preside over Israel in the book of Exodus, when the Israelites flee from Egypt and adopt the worship of their God lost by their ancestors. In this passage of Exodus 23, God tells the Israelites to obey this God because this angel contains God's name within him. In the Bible, the one true God is referred to with the letters YHWH, often pronounced today as Yahweh, though that's pretty well known to not be the actual pronunciation as it is lost. In the greater Jewish tradition, however, there is that other angel that has this name within him, known as the Lesser Yahweh because he's the second in command to the one true God himself. Already you can see the similarities with the Speaker of God herself, someone who's supposed to speak for God, but because of the nature of that role can be mistaken for him, at least so far as the Speaker's own intentions and thoughts being mistaken for God's. We get the expanded story of this character in the third book of Enoch, where this figure known as the Lesser Yahweh is shown not just to be leading Israel, but to preside over heaven as a whole and all of the other intermediaries, even the many Satans who oppose him. It's because of this ruling in heaven that the Lesser Yahweh is more commonly referred to as Metatron, meaning beside the throne. This is a code name meant to emphasize the idea that this figure is the one just beside God and acting on his behalf, with only God himself holding the eternal throne. Connecting Metatron to the Speaker of God even further, however, is the idea that this great throne beside God is none other than the sun itself. The evidence from this also comes from that third book of Enoch, where Metatron is described in great detail, constantly surrounded by the number of 365. On top of that, Metatron is also claimed in the Jewish tradition to be the great ancestor known as Enoch mentioned in the book of Genesis, hence why we get so much of Metatron's story in the third book of Enoch. According to the book of Genesis, Enoch was an ancestor of Noah's who didn't die like Adam or his sons or any of the other patriarchs were said to, and instead, Enoch was claimed to be taken into heaven after walking with God, living only 365 years. Once again, referencing the number of the sun. This number is well known to be the number of days it takes for the Earth to revolve around the sun, painting Metatron as being the sun itself with the Earth rotating around it. You'll notice that the Speaker of God in Hazbin Hotel has imagery built around the sun. While Sarah takes on a color scheme that more so reminds you of the body of heaven itself, which is more cold and moon-like, the Speaker of God glows warmly like the sun and is surrounded by sun imagery, with even the halo behind her head being made to look like the sun itself. To really emphasize this connection, the room of the speaker is built around a sun-looking symbol at the very center, with the room being gold and radiating light itself. When singing with Sarah, the Speaker of God even compares herself to the sun when she tells Sarah that she is unable to give her the answer she wants, as what Sarah wants is a form of light, something the sun would provide, or the Speaker of God in this case, but which here is something that Sarah can only find within herself. Through this, the Speaker of God is calling herself and God the light, and is even pointing towards the light coming from the roof as she says this, through an opening in the ceiling designed again to look like the sun. So it seems obvious to me that the Speaker of God is inspired by the figure of Metatron in particular. But the idea of this sort of figure claiming to act on behalf of God can go very wrong. You see, in Jewish texts like the Zohar, Metatron is described as having aspects of both good and evil within him, as the only entity of all good is God himself. And it's because of this that Metatron is painted in certain stories as being rather misleading. This is the case if you return to the third book of Enoch, whose story is not part of the Jewish canon, but which is also repeated in the later Talmud, making it required reading to become a Jewish rabbi. In this text, Metatron is presented as the ruler of the heavens and insists that when he first came to heaven, God called him his favorite angel and raised him above all the others that had already come before him. Despite this special treatment, however, the story depicts Metatron as being whipped by God. This is due to someone unrelated coming into the heavens and mistaking Metatron for a second god because of his great power and his shared name, leading to the heresy of two gods instead of just one true god. And that could be a huge inspiration for the Speaker of God in Hazbin Hotel. Already, the speaker is like Metatron, claiming to be speaking on behalf of God, but what if the Speaker of God is essentially lying, and is also being punished or will be punished for trying to associate their decisions with the decision of God? Every transgression is a lesson, and this may be the lesson the Speaker of God learns over the course of the show, to not mislead people with what is her words and what is God's word. In Judaism, the reason this happens with Metatron is later rabbis and Kabbalists discuss that sometimes the being Yahweh mentioned in the Old Testament, which is supposed to refer to God, can sometimes refer to the lesser Yahweh, meaning that some of the actions being carried out by Metatron were mistakenly believed to be carried out by the one true God himself. But the story of Metatron doesn't end in Judaism, but also has its strands in later traditions like Christianity and Gnosticism. Now, Christianity is founded upon the story of Jesus, a man said to rise to popularity in the land of then Judea, with his claim that he is the prophesied Messiah as well as the firstborn Son of God. According to Jesus in various passages in the New Testament, however, the true Satan or devil, meaning adversary, isn't some figure in the underworld like we think of with Lucifer, but the actual ruler of the earth. This is a figure he called the Prince of the World multiple times, the current controller of the physical reality. This prince is not treated as good, but as a flawed being who needs to be driven out so that Jesus can ascend and bring us to heaven with him. This is why in some passages, Satan is able to offer Jesus the entire world and all of its wonders and riches, because he is the figure ruling over it. And that is the chief complaint that Jesus has against this figure, this Satan, that he's trying to keep people out of heaven, keeping them trapped in the physical world that he is the prince of. With Jesus being raised in the tradition of the Pharisees of his time, the Prince of the World is an obvious nod to the figure of Metatron, the figure who is not just in charge of the world, but also on recording the deeds and sins of people to decide who gets into heaven, as well as being the speaker to God like the Speaker of God in Hazbin Hotel. We've discussed already how the Speaker of God is allowed to have such horrible things happen like the exterminations, and the connections get even crazier once we move over to Gnosticism. You see, with Metatron sharing the name of God, and later Jewish Kabbalists claiming that the name sometimes means God and sometimes refers to Metatron, the movement of Gnosticism focused on rewriting the stories of the Old Testament to separate the identity of the one true God from the figure of Metatron. In Gnosticism, this figure is referred to often as the Demiurge, meaning architect, as they are the ruler of the physical creation. Additionally, they are known for keeping the souls of divine beings out of heaven and out of where they could ascend beyond the Demiurge. Something kind of hinted at maybe in Hazbin Hotel so far is that heaven isn't actually the end-all be-all, and that Sarah herself seems to be exiled in some way from some original place, with heaven just kind of being her prison the way hell is Lucifer's prison. She makes this really clear at the end of her song, where she seems to be talking about a sort of figurative fall away from God because of her actions. But really, all of these seem to be reflecting some bigger conflict she was involved with maybe earlier on, maybe before the creation of the earth even. And part of me believes the same thing is essentially true for the Speaker of God, that she's also supposed to be seeking redemption, but instead is putting it off as long as possible to maintain this position of authority in heaven. This makes a lot of sense with the lore of Metatron in the Zohar, where Metatron is often compared to the moon. This may seem weird after 3 Enoch compares him to the sun mostly, but in the Zohar, the sun is used to represent the light of God himself. And the reason Metatron is compared to the moon is because Metatron is only meant to reflect the light of God, of the sun, off of himself and onto the people of the earth. According to the Zohar, the sun and moon were originally created with equal power and equal light, but the moon was already jealous of the sun. This makes sense with the Lesser Yahweh, who isn't explicitly described as being jealous of the one true God, but whose entire story seems to be trying to subtly indicate that they are the one true God, so people mix up the two together. It's because of this that the moon doesn't just lose its full brightness, but is also dropped to a lower dimension where they are put in charge of all of the lower creation from heavens down to the earth, but are still considered to be in a fallen state separated from God's love. When it comes to these different traditions, I think the best explanation that captures the ideas of Hazbin Hotel so far and where it's going is a quote from the Jewish Kabbalist Baal HaSulam. In one of his texts, he explains that it's impossible to understand God's plan from anywhere except the end, emphasizing the idea that such a beautiful plan can only be appreciated by the ones who get to see it come to fruition, who finally get to see the crop bloom. And ultimately, the same is true for the show. Whatever God has planned for these characters, and whatever VivziePop has planned for these characters, it's going to be something crazy, but which will likely bring about the best possible outcome for the people of the future. But what do you guys think? This is our bigger video for the new season of Hazbin Hotel, but we definitely have a lot more coming. Right now, if you want to hear my thoughts on Adam, Lute, Abel, Lilith, and even Serpentius, I have more videos coming out this week, so you can subscribe to see those. Or you can join us on Patreon or here on YouTube for our Early Access Membership Club, where you'll get early access to all of my recordings for this week, meaning you get to hear my thoughts before anyone else does in these different videos. Next week, when episodes 3 and 4 drop, we'll also be uploading all of my pre-recorded scripts for that week at the same time, so you can enjoy them immediately as well, and the same thing will happen with episodes 5 and 6, and of course finale week for episodes 7 and 8. Use the link in the pinned comment down below to join the team, and I'll see you guys there.